Howdy there, y'all. Yamasaki here. Welcome back to Yamasaki RC. And today is part 8 of the Lauson hit and miss engine restoration. And I'm hoping in this video we'll be able to finally get this block all repaired up and everything. I've been doing a little work to it, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. But yeah, aside from that, let's see what happens. So stay tuned. So I got a little sidekick today, so I'm feeling good about this. I'm feeling good that we're going to get this figured out. So what I've been doing so far is my brother-in-law has a guy who can hopefully repair this, get it brazed up and everything, and he needed me to groove it out, so that's what I've been doing. I took a small kind of grinding cutting disc on the old rotary Dremel right there, and I just started to groove out that crack. And then once I got to like points where I can't get to corners and things of that nature, I switched over to a diamond tip tool, and I've just been going back and forth trying to groove it out. I don't have a lot of material to work with because this is how thick the water jacket is. It's probably only 1/8 of an inch thick, maybe even a 1/16, so I don't want to go too deep. But if worse comes to worse, I really think that this can be either silver soldered most of the way, and then in parts in this area right here, can just patch it with some JB weld, and it should hold. I mean, I bought a new plug because I lost one, unfortunately. It was a 3/8 standard plug, so yeah, so we're getting that done. I'll go ahead and show you the head because I figured I'd just go ahead and goozy that up and get it done with. Here's the head. It's all back in one piece and finally painted. You can definitely see where it's cracked. I just used JB weld and everything, and I didn't see it before, but there's a micro fracture going straight down, so when we pressed that valve through, it didn't just break that piece off. It was starting to fracture the guide further down, and so I think it would have been pretty hard to braze it. So I just took some JB weld and I put a fuel line hose clamp on there and let it dry and called it good. Alright, so now that we got those two beauties out of the way, we're going to go ahead and give some attention to that old spark box. See if we can get it going again. So here's where I'm at with this old Magnifierito. I've taken it apart here. I've just been cleaning the outside too as well, but I watched some videos on some other channels that went into detail about how to take these things apart, and I kind of get the gist of it. Electronics is just not my strong suit yet. I need to get better at it and add it to my arsenal, but in a gist, pretty much when this goes up here, which it'll contact these 2 points here, and it's actually magnetic. It makes a field that turns it into electricity. You got your set of points here, and then it's got these contacts on each side of the coil, and that's where the spark plug would be, and it produces spark. Now, looking in it, the wiring doesn't look too good, but it doesn't look terrible to where it couldn't work. I've heard that these things can sit for 50 years and still make a spark. The only thing is this one's been buried in the dirt out in the weather for 50 years, so I don't know if that's going to affect it or anything. But I've taken all the important parts off that need contact and cleaned. Cleaned this, I cleaned this, which is actually the bottom of your points system. That would go in there and contact that little spot right there. So I clean that up. I'm going to do some sandpaper on both of the contact areas there. This goes together right here. Then you got two little felt pads which are completely ruined because this side is gone. And then there's a spider that turned into this little felt seal itself. So that's pretty fascinating. But I still need to clean this area here. Get some oil on this. Get some oil in here. Put this all back together. Let's see if it'll do what it needs to do. I can buy parts for it, and I think a full rebuild is a little too pricey. And buying one that's already been restored is way too pricey, so I gotta try and do what I can here just with what I've got. The casing itself is made out of beautiful brass. This part and then the bottom part that rests down here. Seems like these two plates here are not brass. They're just metal, so I might need to paint those. There's your screws that hold your case on. And this thing can be further disassembled, but I just don't think it's necessary. And before we move on, I figured you folks might want to take a look at this. As I was putting it back together, still have to put all the panels back on, but if I get my screwdriver in here and just kind of pry it, we're getting a spark. We're getting a spark out of there. So as long as it's this much put together, you can test it out just by putting your screwdriver in this slot here and moving it up and down. In some of the videos, they say when this moves down like a 1/16 of an inch, the points contact here connected to it by this screw should move down that far. And so I went to test that. And along the way, we can get spark. Sometimes it does it, sometimes it doesn't. So, it seems strong. I cleaned up the contacts. I put some electrical solution on these 3 points and took some xylene and made sure everything was as clean as possible. So, this thing's good to go once I get these panels put back on. Alrighty, so after I got done burring out this spot here, my dad was looking at it, and he figured we might as well try and silver solder this together, back together and get it all fixed up. Well, we just did that tonight, and it may not look the best, but I think it's going to hold up because the worst spots are right here, and you can still kind of see it's right there. Missed a tiny spot right there. But it was only leaking from this point when I put a Vaporust in here to try and clean out the water hopper. It was only leaking from really about here. The rest of this was rusted shut and so tight that water didn't really seep out of there. It just really seeped out right at the widest point of that crack, which is right over that plug fit right there. So I'm going to need to grind this down. I'm going to just put JB Weld in spots that we missed, and it's going to look like there never even was a crack there to begin with, and I bet it'll hold up just fine. So in the meantime, while I'm doing that, let's go ahead and get those valves lapped. It's about time we do that, and then we're going to have to hone out the cylinder, get this thing painted. Alright, so on to lapping the valves. For those of you who don't know what lapping is, basically, when you're working with valves, you want them to be as flat as possible against the seat right here on the head. You want them to make a nice clean seal so no blow-by gets by either of these. This one's the exhaust valve. As you guys remember, it was pretty chewed up by rust. But that seat right there doesn't look too bad. Now, a guy with the proper tools, he would use something called lapping compound. But can't seem to find mine, so what we're going to do is we're going to redneck it and we're going to use Colgate toothpaste. Same thing, it's a little bit of a finer abrasive, but these valves, especially this exhaust valve, amazingly, like I said, it looks pretty good. Not too bad for 100 years old or so. So we're going to get started and do that, and then we'll move on. Alright, so all we got to do is we'll take our valve out here. Set it right there. I'm going to take some toothpaste. I'm just going to put a little bit on the seat there. You don't need much. A little bit on that valve. Set it in there. And I'm going to grab this nifty little lapping tool. Just a suction cup. This one kind of suctions, but not the greatest. But we're still going to make it work. Takes a minute to get used to. And we just got to work it back and forth. It's really struggling to stay on that valve there. The suction cup is, at least. And work it back and forth. That's all you gotta do. You gotta grind the imperfections off of those surfaces. See what we got here. Yeah, it looks like it's working. It's turning black. When you get that blackish gunk color, you know you're finally shaving metal. So I'm actually having to put pressure down on it too, just to keep it spinning. So that added pressure is also helping. But I'm just going to go ahead and keep doing it to this one until I feel it's nice. And then I'm going to go ahead and do this other one. And the lapping for the valves is good and the head's done. I'll be able to get it put back together. I won't be able to assemble it all the way because it'll be easier once it's on the engine to fully assemble it. But other than that, the head's done. Got that little crack repaired the best we could with JB Weld. I didn't really want to use JB Weld on this project, but it turns out it was the only option. And it turned out pretty good for this. Alright, so the update on the block repair. You guys probably remember we tried to silver solder, but once I started grinding on it, trying to smooth it out, get it all nice and shaped out and everything, pieces just started falling off and chipping away, and so we figured that we just didn't get this hot enough, and maybe I didn't put enough braze on it, or not braze, flux on it. So I ended up just JB welding it. However, some of our silver is still there, and it looks like it penetrated really good right there, and it did some over here. But as you remember, I said it never really leaked from these points. So I just put some JB Weld throughout the entire thing. And then I just shaved it off after maybe about an hour of drying almost. And then I put the plug in and I put some Loctite silicone pipe sealant on it. I'm going to have to see if it holds water, and if it does, then it's on to painting and honing. Right on, right on. That'll look good though. It won't even be there when I'm done with it. So it's the next night, and I got those valves in the head, looking real sharp. I did a water test today after I put the JB Weld on and put the seal on, and we were just barely leaking out the bottom here. And now if you remember, the crack was the widest at this port, so I think those threads have expanded a little bit. We put a tap in there, or at least Dad did, and got that to fit in there for me because some of that silver solder got in those threads. But I had to take this off and put some more sealant in there, and I made sure it's covering all around, making a whole white circle over where it is there. It was just barely leaking out the bottom because there wasn't a lot of sealant there. But I think once it fully dries, and this also wasn't fully dry. I mean, it was 24 hours later and it still wasn't dry, so that was probably the problem. And then over here we just barely had a leak. See, there's silver solder right there sealing it up. That's stuff that's stuck. And then over here is JB Weld, more JB Weld. It was leaking barely right there, so I just put a little more JB Weld and spots and canyons across this and over here too. And I think it is going to be just fine once it's all completely dry and everything. So now that that issue is finally resolved, I'm going to get to honing this thing. And I just did a final cleanup. I got the oil out because I've been keeping oil on this to prevent rust, because as you remember, the piston was stuck. There's a nice ridge right about here. You can kind of see it, barely. And then it feels kind of rough right here. In the middle right there, you can kind of see it. And then back here, it's not too bad. So if I work that hone in there a little bit, it'll do pretty good. So I'm going to get set up here. We'll do some honing. About dang time. Alright, so all we got to do next is start honing. And I have a made in the USA flex hone just attached to my power drill here. I originally bought this hone for the Oakland V8 cylinders, but after I figured out that it's going to need reboring and re-sleeved, this thing kind of got put on the back burner until one day I thought, I wonder what hone could work for this thing when I need to get honing on it. And this one fits perfectly. So I have it on speed 1. I put some cutting tap oil in there. I want to see what we can do. We're just going to keep going back and forth. Until we get some good cross-hatching in there. And after 2 5-minute passes or so, this is what we've come out with. It doesn't look too bad. I don't feel any more coarse surface anywhere. There's a little bit of a ridge right here, and I'm wondering if this thing was stuck twice in its life. It got stuck with the cylinder, or with the piston stuck up here, and this is the top of the cylinder head that it was stuck, and then it got stuck back here when I found it and rescued it. But I mean, it feels so nice in there. I think we're good. I think we're good. Alright, I guess the only thing left is I gotta start masking stuff off and get this thing primed and painted. There we go. The block is finally getting primed and painted. I'm doing the bottom first. I got all the journals and everything taped off. Got up here taped off the best I could, being real careful to not get paint there. Masked off the badge. Masked off in there with a towel. So, gotta let this second coat dry, and then I need to do a little bit of paintbrush work inside the water hopper and in the oil splash pan there. But after that, it's on to painting. Get that cylinder lubricated. We're going to start putting this thing back together. Oh yeah. And there it is with its first 2 coats of smoke gray on the top. I'm going to need to wait a few days and let this dry, and then I'll flip it over and do the bottom. I also decided to add some rust prevention inside the water hopper. I used fluid film. It does pretty good for preventing rust and everything. I could have put oil in there, but I'd have to use my hand and get it all in the spots. I just could spray it with fluid film. So I chose that. You know, want to make it last. You know what I'm saying? But you can see how it's got like the casting marks. There's one there, there's one down there. It's just, you can visibly see how they built this engine. It's pretty cool. And I really don't think anything's going to leak out of there now. Paint and primer getting in there. I was sure to spray extra fluid film down there near where the crack is. So, yeah, got it honed, getting it painted. we'll get to putting this thing back together here in a few. Okay, there it is. All painted up. Just got the coats on the bottom of it done last night. I taped off everything that needed to be taped. Everything is good. So now we can go ahead and start putting this thing back together finally. I won't be able to do much assembly for the time being, just for the simple fact that when I go ahead and put that block on the skids, I'm going to need this gas tank in the skid setup, because when you bolt down the motor, it kind of clamps this to everything else on the skid, and that's how that gas tank stays in place. And I can't put the gas tank in because, let me see if I can, you can still prominently hear some rust in there. So I went ahead and I decided I'm going to seal it up with some Pour 15, and I think that'll do it some good. I had to tighten this up because it was loose right here. Had to shave a little bit of copper off in order for that to snug up, but yeah, we're ready to get back to putting this thing together. One of my favorite parts of doing a project like this. So let's roll. So here's all the parts we got to put back on that thing. And it might look like quite a bit, but this is nothing. And that's why I love these old hit and miss engines. There's nothing to them. You got a handful of parts. They're usually moderate in size. Smaller parts are more difficult sometimes to get put on. But yeah, there's nothing to this thing. So it's going to be a breeze. It's going to be a breeze. I think where I'm going to start, I'm going to get the drip oiler tube in. I can get the other water plug in. I think we'll start there. I think that's a good starting point. One more thing before we get started. I keep forgetting to say this, but I'm going to be putting anti-seize on literally everything. I've already put anti-seize here. I've oiled up all the joints. You know, these engines were meant to be taken apart, so the easier I can make it on myself when I need to do maintenance on this thing, the better off I'm going to be. Well, I got that piston in there finally. I had to get the first ring started, and then I put a cloth over this and just lightly tapped it in because there's a little bit of a bevel right here before the cylinder starts. Made it a little bit easier to get it in, but let's move on. Well, there it is, y'all. In all its restored glory. There's the 1920s 1.5 horsepower Lauson Model W hit and miss engine. And I tell you what, I couldn't have expected anything better. I think it turned out pretty good. There's still a few odds and ends left to do on it. There's a couple of bolts I need to address, and of course I need to oil the thing and grease it all up. I did put some grease on the bearings, of course, and I already had some grease here, and I put some grease, you know, in these points where it's needed, but I'll still have to go back through and make sure it's extra lubricated. You know, still got to oil the mag and all that. Get a couple things tightened up here and there. And yeah, by the time you guys see part 10, it'll be all buttoned up and ready to go. So next step, we got to rebuild that sub framework that this thing sits on. We got the skids done. Now we just need to do the sub framework, get that out of the way, slap the two together, and we're going to see if this thing's going to fire up. Feels like it's got good compression. Everything's moving freely. This thing's come a long way from where it began. I think it's been waiting a long time to get this kind of treatment, so this thing got pretty damn lucky. Well, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment for more content. And YAMAHSAKI out. We'll see y'all later.